Today on the Platformer Chronicles, we are going to be talking about Super Mario 64 and GEX 64 Enter the Gecko. Both of these games were during the golden years of the Nintendo 64 during the late 1990s, an era in which all cartoony animal characters were running around in beautiful, colorful atmospheres, being a bunch of badasses with weapons and all kinds of other cool shit. Stuff that made the 90s legendary. The big problem I have with Super Mario 64 is that it's a little overrated thanks to the Nintendo fanboys out there. And I love Super Mario 64 and I love Mario. But literally every platformer, in my opinion, after Mario 64 was better than Mario 64. Like this game, for instance. And another thing is that Super Mario 64 is not a platforming masterpiece, like most people say that it is. It has all of the things that other 3D platformers have after it. I'd like to compare these two games and really show you guys how this character right here really got screwed in the end. A character that's really awesome and should have received more fanfare. Now, all GEX fans know that the PlayStation 1 version of Enter the Gecko is far superior to the N64 version. But we're not here to talk about that today. Let's just look at the N64 version of Enter the Gecko anyway, because that's what we're doing. We're comparing Mario 64 to GEX 64. The big reason I'm making this video is because a lot of the complaints about GEX 64 are also present within Mario 64. For instance, the camera noises. Both games have an annoying sound when you use the camera in both games. In GEX's game, it's a little more annoying because it makes the sound of a cuckoo bird, but they're both making annoying noises. And it's not like Mario 64's, it gets a pass for some reason because it's Mario. People have a bias towards Mario because they love Mario, and so do I. But Mario is not the only great platformer character, and neither is Crash or Spyro, and I love them too. GEX is also great. It's not just a few characters, it's a lot of excellent platformer heroes. So they both have an annoying sound that the camera makes. Mario 64 does not get an excuse. Sure, the camera sound in GEX 64 is slightly more annoying. It's not that much more annoying that the one in Mario 64 is like so much better or some shit like that. Fuck that argument. Number 2. People complain about GEX 64 because they bitch and moan that GEX talks way too much during the game. He has a lot of lines, and he's always constantly speaking and saying things during the gameplay, and people think it's really fucking annoying if you don't think GEX is charming. I like it myself. But Mario does the same fucking shit. Mario never shuts up in Mario 64 either. Sure, Mario doesn't say complete sentences like GEX does, but the whole point of GEX saying sentences in the first place is to show how much personality the character has. GEX has more personality than Mario. It's evident in all the games. This is a plus that the GEX series has over the Mario series. Now, while I think both these are excellent games from the 90s, in my opinion, I think GEX 64 is a little bit better than Mario 64. That's right. Well, first, let's compare the controls of both classic video games, shall we? The controls in Mario 64 are very smooth. Mario moves around and he does everything you want him to do, and it feels very perfecto almost. It's definitely one of the smoothest gameplay experiences I've had with a platformer. I have to give Mario 64 that. GEX himself is a little stiff, but he still has good moving around in his gameplay. So, because of the controls, I would argue Mario 64 should get the point over GEX in this department. Number 2, let's talk about the damn story. because it's not all about the gameplay, it's also about the imagination, something that modern gamers have no concept about. Well, we all know the story of Mario 64. It's the same shit that's always been in every Mario game. Very, very simple story where Bowser kidnaps Peach and Mario has to rescue her. The game does have a twist, however, because the castle is full of lots of mysteries, and they do explain how the Toads are trapped inside the walls, and so it has a little bit of a twist, but it's mostly the same shit. GEX, however, is completely different. It actually has a in-depth story. GEX gets contacted by the FBI, they interrogate him, offer him money to go back into the media dimension and attack Rez, who is destroying television and basically corrupting the minds of the world at large. And GEX has defeated Rez before. The media dimension he's in is very mysterious, hidden in the sky. GEX 64 has a lot of the same mystery in its story and in the hub world, and the same thing is mysterious in the hub world of Mario 64. The hub world in GEX 64 is also mysterious. It has its own little secrets here and there. So Mario was not the only game that had mysterious cool shit in the hub world. GEX also had that as well. The story in GEX is better. It's more complicated. It's more interesting. GEX as a character becomes a hero when push comes to shove. He's really a lazy person, which is very relatable. Certainly more relatable than Mario. GEX is addicted to television, and so were a lot of people back in the day. But if you think about it today, a lot of people are addicted to the internet, for example. Mario really doesn't have things that make him relatable as a character. He's just a cool character, and that's cool. But we're looking at what's better. And in terms of story, GEX definitely has more of it. Plus, there's the villain Mushu Pork in GEX 64, who teams up with Rez and has helped him in his plot to take over the media dimension, and there's more stuff going on there. However, Mario 64 only has one major villain. Literally, that's it. But we'll get to the other bosses in both games later on. But in terms of the story, GEX 64 gets the win. Rez is a more intimidating and creepy and scary villain than Bowser. Bowser is intimidating and scary. Rez is scarier, so he already looks more threatening. Plus, his plot is actually more threatening to the world at large, because GEX is basically holding the fate of the world in his hands. His plot is more dramatic. There's a bigger task for GEX to complete than Mario, because the fate of the world is in GEX's hands. The only thing that's in the fate of anything of Peach is just Mario just has to rescue Peach. The world is not at hand in Mario 64. So there's more at stake in GEX 64. Plus, the manual in GEX 64 has a longer explanation in the story, with lots of sentences and a backstory of GEX, an extra one given that was also began in the first GEX game. There's no shit like that in Mario 64's manual. Comparison 3. The power-ups for both games. In Mario 64, we have the Vanish Cap, the Metal Hat, and the Wing Cap. All three very unique abilities, not seen in previous Mario games. Although you can say the Wing Cap is similar to the Yellow Cape from Mario World, but still, it's a little different. GEX 64 also has his own power-ups, such as Ice GEX and Fire GEX. Both are interesting power-ups, but I have to admit, the power-ups in GEX are a little generic. I mean, fire and ice, while they're cool, it's just a little generic. Whereas the power-ups of Mario 64 are more unique and more creative, actually. I have a little anecdote from my childhood, and I'll keep it very brief. When I was a kid and I saw the box art from Mario 64, and I saw him flying in the sky above the world, I thought that in the game, Mario was going to be able to fly around everywhere at any point in time. And I was very disappointed when I finally got to play Super Mario 64 in 1998. And when I finally got to play it, and discovering that you needed to shoot out of a cannon and you can only fly around for like a tiny bit, I was crushed. I was so disappointed by that. Let me know in the comments if anyone else felt that too. But even still, back in the day, it still was a cool power-up, although I felt like it was underutilized. I mean, really, you gotta shoot out of a cannon? Kinda lame. I know you can not use the cannon, but of course it helps to use it, but still. So yes, for the power-ups, I will give the nod to Super Mario 64, getting the point this time. Graphics. Well, unlike modern gamers, I actually adore and cherish and love the polygon now retro 3D graphics from the 90s myself. I prefer it. So now both of these games are from the same era, and the years they both came out are not too vast from one another. Graphically, the colors in Super Mario 64 are much brighter. It's a very bright and colorful game, definitely. There's no debate there. Now, GEX 64 also has a lot of color, though, but it's purposely meant to be a scary game at points. The haunted levels, the stuff on the moon, the kung fu levels. The color is still there, though. So just because Mario 64 is a more colorful game, that doesn't necessarily make it a better game in terms of graphics. But they both have the same kind of graphics. For this, I'm going to give them both a point, because they're pretty much even here. However, if we were to compare the graphics of Mario 64 to the graphics of the Enter the Gecko version on the PS1 version of Enter the Gecko wins. But we're not comparing the PS1 version to the N64 Mario 64. We're comparing GEX 64 to Mario 64. So graphically, they both get a point. And that's not me saying I think the graphics on the PS1 are far superior. I don't. I think the N64 graphics were better. But again, the PS1 version of Enter the Gecko was better, though. It had more things, so... But anyway, these both get a point for that. Now let's get to one of my favorite parts, the bosses for both games. Which game had better bosses? Well, in GEX, there's really 3 major bosses. Well, technically 4. You got the Tiki Brothers, then you have Mushu Pork, then you have Mecha Rez, which you could consider a boss, pretty much. Then you have Rez as the final boss. So that's 4 bosses, pretty much. Now, Mario 64, it's pretty much just Bowser, Bowser, Bowser. So that's kind of dull. Unlike how it is in GEX 64, where they build up Rez. You hear him talking throughout the game. You hear him talking to you during the menu, the hub world, and you hear him laughing. Sure, you hear Bowser laugh, but you don't hear Bowser say any words, do you? But you hear Rez say some lines to GEX, which makes it sound very personal, even though the conflict between Bowser and Mario is also personal, because they both are in love with Peach. But, again, the characters in GEX have more personality, as I've already explained. Sorry about that, I got a little off track, but what I said was fucking important. Anyway, they build up Rez so much and so well in GEX 64 that you only fight the mini mecha version of him first. And then, when you finally get to the final boss, you see Rez. And it's different at Mario 64. You face Bowser 3 fucking times. Technically, you can say there's other bosses in Mario 64. What about King Bob-omb, the Wiggler, or the Egyptian hands you fight inside the giant pyramid? Those are bosses, I'll count those. But I'm not going to count, like, the big Chili Willy guy in the ice level, or the big bully, the one in the Satan level or whatever. I'm not really going to count them, because that's like, come on. They're just balls with eyes, and there's really not much to that, and they're easier bosses to defeat, and they don't have much else to say, and they're not that dramatic. But definitely Wiggler, the hands you fight in the pyramid, and King Bob-omb. Now, what about the giant Thromp you fight on the top of Thromp's fortress? Would he count as a boss? I don't know. He's so piss easy. It's like, I would actually argue no, kind of. I won't count him, really, because it's just not enough, in my opinion. It's just not enough. Although you can argue King Bob-omb was easy as fuck, but when you play it for the first time, he's not. So that's a little different. Plus, King Bob-omb had more of a backstory. Sure, the giant Thromp had a backstory, but King Bob-omb's had a better one, I thought. Anyway, so technically, those 3 bosses plus the 3 Bowser bosses, okay? While King Bob-omb was cool, and so was Wiggler, and so were the hands inside the pyramid, the villains you fight, the bosses you fight in GEX 64 they seem like they have more personality. Again, the Tiki Brothers, not so much. Mushu Pork, though, is brimming with personality. He's like French, he's weird, he's like a mutant, he like does experiments on creatures, he wants to corrupt people's minds with television, with teaming up with Rez. He's just bizarre, he's like an evil chef, he's like a horror villain, and he has dimension to him. Really, none of the other bosses in Mario 64 already mentioned really have any of this kind of backstory like Mushu Pork does. Mecha Rez, I mean, that's just a robot of Rez, so I'm not going to give that I'm not going to say that's so much better than the other ones. But still, Mushu Pork versus a giant bomb with a little crown on his head. I mean, which one's better? Due to the personalities and due to all of the major bosses in GEX have their own unique songs that also play for each boss. Every single boss you fight in Mario 64 has the same fucking music. Lazy. Except for the Bowser bosses. Every boss in GEX 64 has its own music. It also has its own little hub you fight the boss in. And Mario 64 kind of has that too, though. But I felt like the hubs you fight the bosses in GEX 64 for the bosses, they're more creative and fit the character better. For instance, the Tiki Brothers, you got like a lot of fire. They're by, the ocean, and there's like a crooked dock you're running around, and GEX is dressed like Gilligan from Gilligan's Island, and there's lots of torches and fire and everything, But whereas if you fight King Bob-omb, you're just fighting him on a patch of grass. You see what I'm saying? Plus, in the boss of Mushu Pork, you fight in like this creepy dungeon kitchen where you'll see bloodstains like on the walls, and there's electricity, and it's dark, it's damp, it's got green, and it has like a world of its own, and it feels like it's part of the character's personality. The same thing can be said for when you fight Mecha-Rez. I mean, it's a city that is meant to be a parody of Godzilla, and Gex really is Godzilla in that boss too. He's Gexzilla, which is awesome. So, because of all the stuff I said, and the fact that you fight Bowser 3 times, I mean, come on, guys. GEX 64 gets the point for this. It has better boss variety. Probably my second favorite category, maybe. The soundtracks to both games. Which game has a better soundtrack? Well, both games have excellent game soundtracks, with a couple of memorable tracks for both games. Definitely, there's memorable tracks in Mario 64, especially the Bowser boss battles. The first water level has a memorable tune on it. Although, a lot of the later levels, the music gets a little generic. GEX 64 also has an excellent soundtrack, and especially like the Rocket Channel. And the haunting levels, where you're in the haunted house levels, that has really memorable slasher 80s movie villain vibes to them. The Kung Fu level, Kung Fu Theater, or whatever the fuck it's called, has a really catchy tune. And and the Dragnet level, GEX fans love the soundtrack for that. Kind of would argue the soundtrack in GEX 64 has a little more variety, though, than the Mario 64 one. I don't know. I mean, it could be a toss-up. I'm going to give them both a point for the soundtrack. Plus, I have to mention the extremely catchy hub world music of GEX 64, which sounds like a 90s James Bond movie. So badass and very addicting to listen to. In conclusion, with my points, I think GEX 64 is better than Mario 64, and GEX as a character deserves more love. So really my point of making this video, aside from giving GEX some attention, is that Mario 64 is not this masterpiece that people who love video games seem to make it out to be. There's this pompous attitude that Mario 64 was the good platformer, and literally any game after Mario 64 was a crappy platformer, and the genre needed to go away because it got annoying. Nope, I love 3D platformers, and a lot of amazing 3D platformers came right after Mario 64, such as Spyro, GEX, Tomba, Musashi, Bomberman, Mega Man, Rayman. I mean, the Sonic Adventure is better than Mario 64. The list just goes fucking on and fucking on and fucking on. Mario 64 is a great game, and it helped pave the way for better 3D platformers that came after its wake, such as banjo-kazooie, okay? So, everybody, basically, do not forget about GEX. Do not neglect GEX. Do not think GEX is annoying, because if you do, then I don't see how you can say Mario's not annoying. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you guys think. And always remember, anytime you got an N64 and you got GEX, it's tail time.